This is Reason Revolution. I'm your host, Justin Clark. Thank you for joining us this week. Our episode this week is another interview, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Trav Mamone is an atheist activist, podcaster, and columnist for Paste Magazine, Splice Today, and The Humanist. Trav also serves on the advisory council of the LGBTQ Humanist Alliance, hosts the By Any Means and By Skeptical podcasts, and maintains their own blog, By Any Means, on Free Thought Blogs. They are a bisexual genderqueer atheist who writes about the intersections of social justice and humanism. We had a wide-ranging conversation about Trav's deconversion, the struggles for the LGBTQ community, Trav's personal experiences as a genderqueer individual in the humanist movement, and the problems with dismissing the importance of social justice. I learned quite a bit from Trav, and I'm so thrilled to have him on. And as a quick side note, the last about 10 minutes or so we had some audio issues, so just I tried my best to clean them up as best I could, but please bear with me in my new podcasting venture. I think we still had a really great conversation. So without further ado, here's my interview with Trav Mamone. Trav Mamone, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for kind of coming on last second. I was getting over a cold, and then I had my birthday, so I didn't really have a show scheduled. So I was like, I want to do an interview episode every month, and I hadn't done one for July yet. And I was like, Trav's pretty cool. And then you messaged me, and that was great. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So basically tonight is very free form. We can kind of chat about whatever. I just have a few questions. We can kind of go wherever. My first main question for you basically is, what's your deconversion story? How'd you leave religion and why?
Okay, this is sort of a long one. I guess I can start all the way from the beginning when I was a wee infant. I wasn't really raised in a particular... I wasn't indoctrinated into any particular religion. I mean, I was sort of, I guess, culturally Christian because the only time we really went to church was when someone either got married or buried. You know, we were wedding and funeral Christians. But my mom gave me like a little, my first Bible, those cute little Bible stories and illustrated Bible stories and whatnot. So I knew like the basics. And I was always fascinated by religion. But like I said, we didn't really go to church that much. I was raised by my mom and my grandparents because my dad bailed out on us when I was about 10 months old, not even a year. Saw him sort of periodically. I mention that because that sort of plays a part into the story. Fast forward to high school. I was always severely bullied from first grade to 12th grade, and so so when high school came, I was already having self-esteem issues, and high school, of course, makes it worse. And so I fell into deep depression and, started cutting myself, and, a couple of times got caught writing suicide notes. And so, yeah, I was basically trying to find something to help with that. And when I was 17, I started dating a girl who was a Christian. And we, during a really bad period of depression, a really bad night, she gave me some really comforting words and said that, God would be the father I never had. And so that really hit a nerve for me. And looking back, I know basically what happened was, she said she happened to say the right words at the right time. But at the time, I thought it was some sort of spiritual experience where God finally caught up to me. So, I was a Christian from 17 to 29 or 30 or something like that. I started off first as sort of a moderately kind of liberal evangelical. I believe that, the Bible was the word of God, but I didn't think that, voting Democrat sent you to hell or anything like that. And so I kind of always didn't really fit in with church culture, even though I love Jesus. But as far as deconversion, it was sort of a slow gradual thing. Like, I mean, I think it first started when I read Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller. Are you familiar with that book?
I used to work at a bookstore. I know of the cover. I've never read it.
Okay. Well, it's a memoir, kind of like Anne Lamott's Traveling Mercies, where Don is basically talking about, his faith journey. And he was like the first one that said, you could be a Christian and vote Democrat. And then let's see here. What came next? Oh, yeah. I also started reading like a lot of the emergent church writers like Rob Bell and Brian McLaren. And they started I started drifting away from, having a semi literal view of scripture to a more liberal one, where it's like, okay, these stories probably didn't happen. They're metaphors, but Jesus, everything that happened to Jesus, that totally happened, And what also really sort of was a big part of my deconversion was when I was 23, I think. I'm 34 now, even though I don't look it.
No, you look remarkably young. I would not have pegged you as being 34.
Well, what happened? Well, my secret is I have a portrait of myself hidden in my room that grows old and ugly and decrepit while I stay young, beautiful, and pure forever.
Well, I would need that because I just turned 27. I look like I'm going on 40. So,
yeah. So, anyways, I became engaged to this girl whose family was like a very conservative Calvinist family, and so there was a lot of pressure on me to be like, a man of God and, really fit into their mold of what I was supposed to be. And it actually brought up a lot of gender dysphoria, which I didn't really know at the time was gender dysphoria. And so that we were like together for 6 years, and out of the 6 years, I was only happy for 3 of them. Mm-hmm. And finally, I got out of that relationship. And that experience sort of got me to explore more liberal theology and really embrace my queerness, my bisexuality. Hadn't figured out the gender part yet, though. And then it came to a point where I think it was actually, I know this is cliche, but yes, Dawkins was instrumental in my deconversion. The first book I read by him actually wasn't God Delusion. It was The Magic of Reality. And just him saying, like, all the beautiful things about nature can be explained scientifically. There's no need for supernaturalism. Mm-hmm. And so was like, okay. It didn't take long to realize what he was trying to say. And so I just started like exploring more about science and the way the universe works. I was watching a lot of videos by like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And that basically, I like to tell people, I deconstructed God so much that one day he eventually just disappeared.
Okay. That makes total sense. That's actually fairly similar to me. I mean, just as a quick Cliff Notes version, I grew up non-religious. Mm-hmm. My parents were not religious. I think I mentioned before, I can probably count on one hand the amount of times I've actually been to church for religious purposes. And I flirted with different religions. Like you, I dated a girl who was a fundamentalist Christian, but I always make the joke that my way of being Christian was listening to Bob Dylan's gospel period. Like that was my way of trying to understand it. I was into Buddhism for a while and this and that and the other. And then by senior year of high school, I was just kind of like, it was just a gradual thing where I went from just sort of like very Unitarian style theology to deism, like Thomas Paine, and then Jefferson, and then agnosticism, and then eventually I was just like an atheist. The first book I read at Dawkins was The Greatest Show on Earth, which I got for free. I started at Books A Million as my college job in 2009, and we had a book giving away contest, and we would get advanced copies of stuff. Now, most of the time, when you get advanced copies, they'd be like cheap paperback pieces of shit. They weren't very nice, but they actually had nice hard-bound copies. And they had that book. And it was the first book I ever read by a scientist, and the first book I ever read about evolution. And it was kind of like, wow. It was really kind of eye-opening. And then obviously I read like the God Delusion and stuff like that. So I totally understand this idea of like you have this concept of God in your head, and then it kind of changes, and then it changes again, and then it changes some more to the point where the concept that you have is really indistinguishable from no concept at all.
Right.
Right on, right on. So really it was just this long process of just losing it that was really kind of your path to becoming an atheist.
Yep, pretty much. In fact, I think I started identifying as humanist first before I started identifying as atheist. I know that's sort of ass backwards. During my sort of deconstruction, where I was trying to figure out a label for myself, I went through a period where I called myself a pantheist, humanist, Unitarian Universalist, because I was like, okay, well, God is just it's just a metaphor for nature, and like Carl Sagan said, you can't pray to gravity, and so that was sort of like my kind of way of identifying myself, until finally I was like, you know what, I'm going to embrace the A word. I tried to avoid the word atheist for a while because, well, let's face it, there's a lot of negative connotations to it. Like, I thought, like, you had to be 100% sure there was absolutely no God whatsoever. You had ultimate proof, but you and I know that's not how it works. It's basically,
Exactly.
The lack of evidence for a God that makes us atheists. And, it was sort of weird. Like, at first I was actually quite a sort of, almost like a faithist, like Chris Stedman at first, but then later on became like an angry atheist. I know I got that ass backwards.
No. I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly coming out of the liberal theological background that you had. Right. I think it makes a lot of sense to have sort of gone from the Stedman style of atheist to a more hardcore version, because you would think that would be backwards, but in reality, it is very much a progression where, by the time you get to the angry part, you've really let all of the supernatural go. And at that point, for some people, and I don't know if this is like you, and I'd love to hear your answer about this, but some people I've talked to, when they've talked about losing their faith, that they spend a lot of time being angry. Like angry that they felt like their family lied to them, that their community lied to them, that the world that they sort of understood was not true, and that really left a certain level of resentment in them. Was that like that for you, or was it kind of I kind of felt like whatever about it?
Kind of more like I felt whatever about it, because like I said, I wasn't indoctrinated into Christianity. If I was indoctrinated and if it was, pounded to my head every single day and night that I had to be, holy and pure, or else God was going to throw me in hell, and you better damn sure not come out queer.
Yeah.
I would probably have a lot more battle scars than I do now.
Right
the
on.
Scars are there. They're just not quite as much as some of my other friends who have suffered, literal abuse in the name of religion.
Oh, I know. The thing that fascinated me was just the fact that, I don't know, like I live in Indiana, and one thing I can tell you is I live right in the Bible Belt, but I never felt that level of animus. And part of that's probably privilege, being a, white, middle class, cis guy, not going to get a lot of trouble. Not to mention the fact that I'm almost 6'4", so people don't tend to fuck with me, even though I'm really nice. At least I think I am. But I just hear these terrible stories of like, oh, my parents kicked me out of my house and this and that and the other, and it's like it's really terrible what happens to some people. And I really applaud people like David Smalley, who set up the I Am Fourth Fund. To help people, who are transitioning out of a religious lifestyle and their families sort of disown them or whatever. So I didn't realize the severity of that until I really learned it as I was getting into the atheist movement.
Right. Yeah. I used to tell people all the time, when I think David Silverman said, atheists are most persecuted, most hated group. And I'm like, well, queer kids are still getting thrown out of their homes, and trans people are still getting killed. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I think that kind of happens more with the LGBT community than with the atheists. But I have heard stories like, oh, speaking of which, there was this one particular person. I think it might have even been a trans person that David Smalley helped out, they got kicked out of their home and was trying to find a place to sleep, and I think Smalley and them helped them out. It was so long ago. I don't remember.
It was
all
a
the
while
details.
back. I just remember hearing a story about a young trans person who wanted to go to school for biology, and so they wanted to travel to, I think, out to the West Coast or something to study biology or something along those lines. But, you've really given me an excellent segue here, Trav, because that's really sort of my next question is, I wanted to make sure coming into this discussion, I wanted to do as much research as I can, because I'm going to be completely honest with you. So much of what goes on within the LGBTQ community, I'm just ignorant of, and I admit that. And so what I was trying to do was trying to do some research, even though I myself identify as a bisexual man, which is something that I didn't realize was a part of me until I was years older, but it is a part of me. So you identify yourself as bisexual as well as genderqueer. Would you be so kind as to kind of share with us how you sort of discovered this about yourself and kind of what this means to you?
Oh, sure. Hang on just one second.
Sure, no
here.
problem.
I just need to had to turn my phone on completely silent and not vibrates.
That's very
just in
kind
case
of
the
you.
mic
Thank
picks
you.
it up. Well, as cliched as it sounds, I always felt different. Growing up, I always felt like somewhat like a boy and a girl at the same time. I mean, I know we all have like masculine and feminine traits.
Sure.
But mine was to the point where I felt like, masculinity kind of felt like a pair of shoes that didn't quite fit. It was manageable, but still not the best. Like kind of like I used to wear a pair of Adidas that had very high arches, and I'm incredibly flat-footed. And so for a while, so that was like manageable, but still gave me blisters at the end of the day. That's what it was felt like, being a boy for me, where I was associated with the girls. I felt more like I was one of them, but also felt like I was like, I'm one of you, but I'm also not, And then around, I think, middle school or high school, I started discovering my sexual identity, where I was like, oh, women, they're so beautiful, and yet I kind of want to kiss my friend Anthony. What's that all about? But I thought it was like just a phase. At the time during the late '90s when I was growing up, most of the discourse surrounding LGBTQ people surrounded mostly on gay and lesbian people, and so bisexuality was sort of like okay, you kind of like this thing, you like a little something on the side, but you're really either one or the other. And so that was another reason why it took me so long to come out. Interestingly enough, though, I thought that, I don't know, it's sort of like since I'm in the middle of both the sexual and gender spectrum, it's sort of like, well, what came from, sort of like a chicken and egg thing, Am I androgynous because I'm bi, or am I bi because I'm androgynous? Most non-binary people I know, or at least are, either bi or pansexual. I don't know if it's like a direct correlation or just I don't know, just a random thing. But I remember like I finally came out as bi right at the time I broke up with my fiance. And at the time I was attending a more progressive Lutheran church. And so they didn't, have any problems with it. As far as the genderqueer stuff, I think it was when I used to watch this one person on YouTube named Verity Ritchie, and they did a lot of like bisexual videos. And then one video they came out as genderqueer, and they described it as being both a boy and a girl at the same time. And I was like, oh, there's a word for that? That was like my immediate thought. And so but I'm also the kind of person who tends to gravitate towards whatever label fits the best at the time. And so it's like there was like a 3-month period I was a libertarian, and that's a reason. And that's something I don't really like talking about.
That's okay. That's okay. I had a 2-year libertarian period, so.
Okay, gotcha. So, but after a while, I just started really exploring my gender identity, especially my presentation. I started painting my nails. Mm-hmm. I shaved off my beard. I grew my hair long. I started experimenting with makeup and starting to wear pants and tops from the women's section at Target. And it seemed like the more the more feminine I presented myself, the more I felt like I was sort of ripping a mask off of my face, that's been plastered there since birth. And the way I like to define genderqueer is this. If you have like red paint and yellow paint, you mix them together, you get a brand new color, orange, right? And so that's how I feel about my personal gender identity, a mixture of boy and a girl, to the point where it's like it becomes something new. Although there are some times where I kind of think like, oh, maybe I'm actually just a trans woman, but I don't know. It feels like genderqueer is like the best word that fits me right now.
Okay. And that's the one thing that I find very interesting is especially after reading one of the more recent pieces you did for Paste, which I thought was quite interesting about the sort of debate between, are human beings sort of intrinsically sort of sexually dimorphic, or is there a bit more of a spectrum? And I thought it was very, I think, educating for me, was learning that, if you think about it in many ways, we think of it much akin to a bell curve, where most people sort of fit somewhere in the middle, and on the extremes there's differences. But that doesn't invalidate like the middle doesn't invalidate the end, and the end doesn't validate the middle. It's just a part of human experience. Interestingly enough, that does catch a lot of backlash in the community. There's a lot of people who, I can think of just a couple of activists in the movement who are far more conservative than me. I think the one I can think of off the top of my head is probably Gad Sad. Who's probably the most like adamant, like, no, we are sexually dimorphic and this and that and the other. And I find that to be so limiting, because we're learning more and more about this science all the time. And I found your piece to be, I think, extremely enlightening about that.
Thank you. Yeah, the piece was basically written in response to Lacey Green's latest Twitter controversy, where she said, don't say, person with prostate or a person without prostate. Say, biologically male, biologically female. And so she got a lot of shit for it. A lot of people thought she was a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist, someone who says, oh, yeah, those are people who say that trans women are basically men. They're not real women, but that's a whole other can of worms. Huh. But so I decided, okay, well, why don't I just do some research on it? And so I interviewed Julia Sereno, a trans woman activist and also biologist, and said, okay, what's your hot take on it? And she basically gave me some articles, and told me how, like, even biological sex, we think there's only two, man and woman, or excuse me, male and female, but intersex people exist, Yeah. And even though even people who like aren't necessarily intersex, they still might have like some male female qualities. Like I remember I have for example, I have a friend who's a woman. As far as I know, she's not intersex at all, but she has that little bit more testosterone that gives her a lot of hair on her arms, So yeah. I personally think that like both biological sex and gender identity are like really complex things. I think I said it was like a tapestry that's full of 50 shades of nuance or something like that.
Yeah, you compared it to a mosaic, which I thought was quite right.
Yeah, definitely.
The thing that was always interesting about me, it was a couple years ago, I was just kind of coming to terms with the fact that, like, that I was a bisexual. I didn't know it. I just sort of, I had this angst in my head, particularly because my wife and I were about to get married at the time, and I was very angsty about whether this was the right decision. I was thinking about these other things, and I just was like, and I just said, I need to be honest with somebody about this. I need to just talk to somebody about this. So I just went up to my wife, Kaylee, one day, and I said, look, this is who I am, and I don't want to leave you. I want to be with you. I don't want to be with a man. I just need you to know that this is a part of me. And she goes, honey, I knew that. You didn't have to tell me that. And I was like, okay, thanks. And then after that, it was like, oh, okay. Because there's such a social stigma about people that don't fit into these nice little boxes that you can define.
Right.
Especially when it comes to sexuality, because my personal attitude has always been individual rights, human rights. People should be who they want to be so long as they don't violate the rights of others. And we should celebrate diversity in that regard. But it's very hard because there's sort of the legal, political end of it where you're fighting for equal rights in front of the law and things like that. But then there's the social component. That's, I think, much, much harder. And I mean, I can't even begin to really speak about that. And that was going to be my next question for you is, what sort of challenges and rewards have you gained since sort of really going on this path of discovery about yourself, both as sort of a free thinker atheist and as well as like a genderqueer person?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. For the positives, I've really discovered this great community of activists and podcasters. Oh, the atheist podcast community, man, it's like family,
Oh, good.
Like, oh yeah, like ReasonCon 3, which happened in Hickory, North Carolina. Oh, that was like a family reunion. I mean,
fantastic.
I like when I came home, I was like in tears because I was just so emotionally overwhelmed. Plus, I didn't really get a lot of sleep. But so yeah, and also not only being part of this great atheist community, but also being genderqueer, I've really started a lot of conversations about what gender is, and really got people to really rethink things. In fact, I actually got a chance to speak at the American Humanist Association conference last month, and was doing a Genderqueer 101 talk. And I cannot, I lost count of how many people came up to me afterwards throughout the rest of the day, and even the next day, saying, "Oh, I loved your talk. You explained it to me in a way that I could understand. Thank you." So that's definitely been the positive part. The negative is, well, I mean, since I do talk about social justice issues, I don't know if I call myself a social justice warrior, because some people say that means, oh, that's just, left-wing trolls. You're not a troll, Trav. You try to engage in conversations with people.
Yeah.
But there are some within the atheist community. They're mostly just, people in the comments section on Twitter and Facebook. No one really, except for Bogosian, Gadsat, and all of them, it's mostly just like the trolls in the comment section, that where as soon as you say something like, if you even mention the word wage gap, they start frothing in the mouth and start hitting you with every single Christina Hoff Sommers article on it, and or if you say something about, gender is a spectrum, they'll start saying, penis equals boy and vagina equals girl. It's basically biology. Da 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 da. And so that's basically been
Sure.
one of the main drawbacks of it.
Well, and that's the thing, I've sort of noticed this but from afar, and now sort of getting into this space over the last year or so, I have noticed this very noticeable divide that sort of exists. There's a very traditional wing of the sort of the skeptic, atheist, free thought community. It's very much about skepticism, free thought, separation of church and state, science. And then there's this other wing that's we support all of that, but we also need to take into account here issues of social justice and economic fairness and human rights and things like that. And the thing that I find crazy to me is this thing that there's this cadre of people, people like Dave Rubin, or what's his fucking name? Sargon of Akkad, these other guys who it's being like conservative. Now I know Ruben will fucking rip his head off for being called a conservative, but he basically is one. You know,
either that or libertarian.
He's libertarian, or he's at the very minimum he's center right. I mean,
right.
You know, because he always says like, oh well, I support gay marriage and I have a gay partner and I have a gay married partner, and I'm like, yeah, but there are a lot of Republicans who are gay married, you know, and you know that issue's fairly settled in some respects. Is that it just seems to me like the things that I think are good to talk about, things that you talk about, or Sincere Carabo, who's a friend of mine, who you probably know a little better than me, but I've known him for a couple of years now. I used to make graphics and stuff for him, and we've been very cordial. Is that you guys are really hitting hard on these serious questions and making people deal with them. And you're really good at really calling out bullshit. Like it was either last night or the night before, Dave Rubin posted like this thread of a soldier.
Yeah.
It's really shitty and just nonsensical about like, oh, when you're in the shit, you know, you can't be dealing with your own shit. And I'm like, wait, hold on. People deal with their own shit every day. Just because they're getting shot at doesn't mean that they're not dealing with things. You know, people have PTSD, people have wives, people have kids. If they're trans, they're dealing with that. Like, if they're a woman, they're dealing with other things. Like this idea that somehow when you're a soldier, all of the petty life shit you deal with every day just goes away is really silly to me. And I found that it was just like Ruben was like, please give this a listen. And you were like, I did give this a listen, and it was bullshit, which
exactly.
I appreciated that. Yeah, because like it seems to me like there's this emphasis on, you know, if we don't do the kind of thing like Pete Boghossian talks about or whatever, it's like we're gonna end up in this like fucking Mad Max wasteland of like postmodern nonsense, which trust me, there's a lot of that going around. I mean, part of why I think Trump was so successful is because of postmodernism. I think he's the first postmodern president where facts and common sense and a firm grip in reality have just no rule over him.
Oh, I see what you mean now. I thought you meant you're about to say that Michael Foucault like somehow made people racist or something like that. I was like,
No. I wrote about Foucault in undergrad, and I can tell you, no, that's not my position. My position has generally been to the point that that he has deconstructed the concept of reality. And because the fundamental thing about postmodernism is the concept of, as you well know, is the concept of power. Everything is about power. Power relations between different people. And it's almost like Trump intrinsically knows that. He knows that, like, it doesn't matter what I do specifically. It doesn't even really matter what I say. It's all about the way in which I say it that will rile people. Like his crazy shit yesterday about, you know, I'm going to ban transgender people from the military. Even though it wasn't an executive order, he didn't talk to the Joint Chiefs. The Joint Chiefs come out today and say, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Like, and it's like, but it was all of a distraction to get people off the thing that chances are the healthcare vote was going to die, which that version of it did.
Right. As my friend Eli Bostic would say, jingly keys, jingly keys.
Absolutely. He's brilliant at that. It's maybe the only thing he's brilliant at. But he's truly a master of being able to wield power through the sort of machinations. When you destroy truth, you can rebuild a version of your truth in your own image. And then you can use that to your advantage, which is really, I think, distressing for democracy. But I really like the fact you were bringing up earlier about community, because I you know, you and I are Facebook friends, and I read some of the nice things you were saying about, like, when you came home from ReasonCon and stuff like that, about like, it's this wonderful community of people. And that's the thing we need to keep in mind here, is that, like, despite our differences, and we'll have those, and that's fine, like, there's these bigger picture things that we need to remember that are so important. So, you know, I guess that's just kind of my take on it, because my thinking on this subject, what I try to do with my show is try to be, I mean, I have a pretty firm stance on certain things, but I just try to be a reporter in some respects.
Right.
So, like, my normal show, like, once a month I'll do the interview show. The regular show is basically, I call it, like, it's like the Rachel Maddow show for atheists. I do a lot of news. I do a long-form commentary segment at the end. She does hers at the beginning. I do mine at the end. I call it the special comment. And I just kind of try to do that thing. And everybody kind of does their own thing. And so I guess this would be a great time to kind of talk about your podcasts and what you put together. So you've got 2 going on. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
So you've got By Any Means, which is also the name of your blog, and then
Yes.
By Skepticality. So share with me kind of the gist of kind of the 2 shows and kind of what they offer to listeners.
Okay, well, it's actually called By Skeptical Podcast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon
No,
me.
that's cool. So By Any Means, that is more of an interview-based show where I just interview different podcasters, writers, bloggers, activists, artists, scientists, or whatever, and just sometimes I even just, interview Facebook friends just to get their stories. It's basically just a conversation where, usually I talk about, first I ask about the guest's backstory, and then I get into a little bit about what they do, and sort of ask questions about that. I think, let's see here, if there's a particular favorite of mine. Well, I will say this. If I can have any claim of fame for my podcast, it's the only podcast interview that anyone's ever done with a blogger named Nikki Massey, who passed away last year. In fact, she thinks she died a couple months after the podcast came out, and that was definitely quite interesting thing because I've been following her on the Orbit since that got started. I think it was early last year, and I loved her stuff. She was funny, she was smart, she didn't give a shit attitude, and when I interviewed her, she had the same demeanor. She's the same person that she was on the blog. Right. So another interesting person that I interviewed was David Silverman, and I don't know if you ever had a chance to talk to him, but he'll take 15 to 20 minutes to answer just one question. And so I think I only asked him 3 questions, but we still had a good conversation. And so for my second podcast, By Skeptical, it's me and Morgan Stringer, formerly of No Religion Required. And that's more of a news commentary show where we basically sometimes we have a specific theme that will explore. We did one episode about bad vaginal hygiene. Woo. That was a really fun one. We mostly focused on Gwyneth Paltrow and the Goop side and the jade egg.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we did one, I think the highest rated one, the most popular episode we ever did was us 2 and Andrew Torres from Opening Arguments podcast. And we were basically discussing, when Milo Yiannopoulos at that one campus talk, basically posted that picture of the trans girl, basically outed her. Is that considered hate speech under the law? And, does that mean he should be banned from college campuses? Well, Andrew broke it down that it's really complex. Hate speech is more sort of something that directly, leads to violence. And so technically that wouldn't be considered hate speech. As far as what to do with Milo, being that he doesn't like being confronted, if he comes to a college campus, you should contact your dean and be we should set up a debate to hear both sides. But then I think shortly after that episode came out, Milo, it came out that old interview about him and pedophilia, and so his shit pretty much sank.
Yeah, I remember reading about the whole controversy. The one that was also particularly weird was the one involving Ann Coulter, when I guess she was supposed to speak at UCLA. And that was weird because the UCLA campus had actually been extremely accommodating to her and said, the day that we want you to talk is this one particular day. The reason we want you to do it on this particular day is this is the day where we can secure the building, we can get the authorities that we need to, and this and that and the other. And she basically told them to go fuck themselves. And when she did that, she said, fuck it, I'm going to come on the day that I want to. And then all hell broke loose. And then they canceled the whole thing. And then she tried to claim as a martyr. And I was like, but they were overly accommodating to you and you just decided to be an asshole. So it's like, because you wanted to basically become a martyr for a false cause. So the Milo one is obviously gross without question, but I found that one to be equally worse because it was she purposefully knew, she was purposefully, and maybe Milo was too, but personally sort of stirring the shit, which is just, it's wild. I mean, the whole thing is it's tough because I'm a very strong supporter of free speech, but at the same time, I mean, what Milo did to that student was just absolutely unconscionable, and it was extremely unethical. I couldn't tell you if it was legal or not, but it was extremely unethical, and I think that it's one thing to be a critic, right? It's one thing to say that you have a problem with trans people, this and that and the other. The speech may be disgusting, but it's one thing to have an opinion, and it's another thing to go after an individual person. And that was the divide that really upset me. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of really cool shows, and you do a lot of writing. So you've been writing for Paste, you've been writing for a bunch of other sites. What generally kind of pieces can we expect from you at some of the places that you write at?
Well, I should say that I'm no longer at Pace because their science section is closing. I've been writing for their science section for a good couple of months. Plus, also, it's been a hassle getting paid by them because their whole payroll thing really screwed up. That's a whole other story. But generally, what you can expect from me is sort of okay, here's a controversial topic that everyone's giving their hot take on. Let me see if I can try to, find out what this thing is all about and try to cover it from all different angles, basically to see what the facts are on the thing. And usually it's these, controversial issues that everyone's getting their hot take on are way more complicated than can be, a Twitter talking point, can't be summed up in 140 characters. And so, that's pretty much what I do. And I also do a little bit of autobiographical writing. I don't do much because I figured, well, most of my day is spent inside the house in front of a computer, and so I don't really think that's too exciting to write about. But for Splice Today, not only have I been doing articles, sort of getting trying to figure out what's the truth behind all the talking points, but also a little bit about my own process, coming to terms with my gender identity. And I did this one where I talked about what it was like to buy a skirt for the first time and how liberating it felt, but also extremely scary because it's oh, I gotta wear this in among certain company because if I don't really. Where I live, it's rural, but not exactly Bible Belts, but still not exactly most trans-friendly place. So that's basically what I wrote. Although I will say this, on my way to a local PFLAG meeting about a couple of months ago, I discovered I needed to buy some cigarettes. And I was already wearing the skirt, so I thought, okay, let me just go to Royal Farms real quick, and hopefully no one gives me shit. And surprisingly, nobody did. I might have had a few little glances, but I guess everyone was like, it's a thing. Everyone's got a thing nowadays.
Well, that's cool. At least it didn't become a huge problem. I found that piece that you wrote for Splice particularly interesting because, it's to be who you are is in many ways it's such a courageous thing, but it's also such a harrowing thing because you sort of deal with the day in day out of how the fuck are people gonna react to me? How the fuck are people gonna be nice to me? And most of us are I think lucky enough where we don't have to kind of do that shit all the time. And I think it's very interesting because I love in the piece you were talking about how, like you were like kind of grabbing the skirts kind of quick, and then you were going into the dressing room, you tried them on, they were cool. And then you were really worried about getting up to the checkout, but then you got it to the checkout, the person was like, you want the hanger? And you were like, oh, okay, this can be okay sometimes. And I thought that was like really nice. I thought that was a real sort of, I guess, affirmation of humanity in some respects, because the person who was checking you out decided not to be a complete asshole about it, and was just like, yeah, this is a thing, and this is fine, and this is cool, and they were just really accommodating to you. And that, whether that was motivated just purely by their job or if they're probably a decent person, who knows? But the fact that that it didn't become a thing, I think is quite a testament to how things are changing. Even though they may be changing slowly, too slow for some of our liking, but it is changing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is getting better. Now, I will say this, that there are a lot of trans and gender nonconforming people who aren't as lucky as I am, like they might not be able to get a job, or they live in like a really conservative area where they have to really worry about their lives more than I do. And so I try not to say, I went to a gas station to buy cigarettes in a skirt and nothing happened to me, and act like my experience is like everybody else's experience.
True, and I think that's a good distinction. It's one distinction that I know that you've made, and I know it's a distinction that other writers, definitely Sincere Carabo, have made, that whatever your personal experience is one thing, but you can't use your experience as a way to invalidate somebody else's. You have to sort of have a conversation about what people deal with and how they deal with it and how things are complex and different, rather than just sort of saying well, my shit's good, so everybody else's shit's better be good. I think that's a bit myopic.
Yep, definitely.
Right on. Well, I think we're getting fairly close to our time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. I really appreciate you sticking around even through all the tech issues. So where can people find you and find your work?
Oh, sure. They can go to freethoughtblog.com/byanymeans, and that's by spelled B-I. They can follow me on both Facebook. They can just look for Trav Mamone. And on Twitter, my Twitter handle is tmamone. And so, yeah, that's where you basically find my writing and links to my podcast.
Awesome. Trav Mamone, thank you so much for being on my show tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was great.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Take care.
You too.
And that was my interview with Trav Mamone. You can follow Trav on Facebook at facebook.com/byanymeanspodcast and on Twitter at tmamone. You can also support Trav's work through their Patreon page, also at tmamone. Please subscribe to Reason Revolution on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. If there's a platform you listen to podcasts on that I'm not on, please let me know and I'll try to make it happen. Send us your feedback at reasonrevolutionpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at The Daily Clark. Check out the new Reason Revolution blog. All episodes and additional content are available there. reasonrevolution.wordpress.com. Until next week, this has been Justin Clark, and this has been Reason Revolution.